My name is Shirkydra Roberts. Been able to tell my story about hope after child being for about 8 years of my life and being introduced so early and being able to look at my story out of the eyes of hope instead of pain now. So my story started with my stepfather around 8 years old, and it started off with just like fondling and touching inappropriately, and I wasn't aware of what was going on. I was a kid. So it went from fondling and touching to groping, over time. And then that was probably a year or two into it. And finally it went to like touching, my private parts and giving or attempted penetration. He was never able to fully penetrate, but attempted penetration. It kind of just happened the same way over the years. I would be sleeping, I would be in my room, and he would come in my room whenever, nobody was home. Sometimes it was, I think especially when I was younger, it was playing before it was like playing around and using playing around or wrestling, or how little kids is all over their parents. Sometimes he used that as a segue to inappropriately touch or grope or groan. And so probably around 10 or 11 years old, I was like, this is not right. I kind of had that aha moment, like it wasn't right, but I didn't say anything. I think I was so scared because my mom was a single mother, 3 kids, and I just saw her struggling already. So I already was like, well, to add this to it, I kind of just dealt with it. And my stepfather was I'm not going to say he was a preacher, but he was a man of faith. He wanted us to read the Bible, know it back and forth. I was young watching The Exorcist, learning about demons, learning about hell. And so I had this fear of God, and then I had this going on. It kind of just confused me in a lot of ways. I think a lot of it when you have your cousins or your siblings and y'all playing house and all these, you kind of look at it like, okay, it was normal, and then you grow up and realize, well, that's not so normal. That's not a thing that we should be doing or encouraging. And so when you're doing these things young, your sexuality is in question. I was anti at a very young age because of what was happening. So as a teenager, I was very confused on men and women. I felt the desire for women probably came from safety, but I never kind of discovered then what was going on. I just knew okay, I know that this is not right based on God, but this is what I'm feeling and I'm confused. And I was already introduced to, like I said, fondling, groping, pornography. I just kind of knew a lot of these things at an early age, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't tell anyone. As years went on, I just started pouring that energy into the sports. So I was a great athlete. So now I'm kind of in high school, just kind of going on my 9th and 10th grade year. But then I had one of my good friends, their mother kind of took me in so that I can go to a lot of my volleyball and basketball games. And so I kind of got away from it, but I had so much pain going on. I started cutting in high school, and I was pretty much inflicting that pain on myself, trying to just deal. I think at that moment, I was really just trying to get my mother's attention. And maybe I felt if she would have asked the questions like what's going on, maybe I probably would have been more open to talking about it. I felt very kind of just confused on what should I say? How do you start it? Will people believe me? Growing up in a culture, and I would say the Black families, it's a lot of what goes on in this house stays in this house. A lot of kids don't really have a voice. It was you make good grades, you do your chores. So I don't really think there was a space created to have discussions like this. I wasn't aware of what was. And even when you watch TV or you see things where grown women, it happened to adult women, but I didn't know what was happening to me as a child. I know this is wrong, but I don't know what to say. And my stepfather comes off as very he's very Christ-like and very nice and humble and soft-spoken. And I think that was a challenge for me because I almost felt I was comforting the abuser. I was always the comforter. I wanted my mom to be okay. I wanted, my abuser to be okay. And I don't know where that heroic cape kind of came from. I guess it was more so like I didn't want nobody to feel what I was feeling. I remember we was staying with my grandmother, and my mother used to leave. She was just, like I said, she was a single mother, 3 kids, so we was living with my grandmother, sleeping in the same bedroom. But I guess during her dating phase, she would like leave at nighttime or leave us home, and I used to cry like, "Where's she going?" I was very attached to her, and finally she was like, "I want to introduce you guys to a man that she was dating," and I remember going to the Days Inn Hotel in Dallas and meeting him. Like I said, and he took us to the zoo. Very nice. I never saw it coming. I, had this perception, and my dad was not really in my life. I remember him and having to sometimes go to his house, and my mom kind of tried to protect us because he was alcoholic, and so I didn't see him much. And so it's like this man kind of came in like the hero and saved the day. And I think that's kind of what everybody saw. When my stepdad came into our life, he was very Christ-like, soft-spoken, humble, very nice, and he seemed fatherly. He didn't have kids, but he seemed like he was ready to step up as a father. The first time it happened is I was really small. I was still sharing a room with my sister, and the fondling, kind of like watching, I felt like he used to like just watch me in my room or stare at me a lot. But I think it just started with touching. In the first home we ever got with him, that's as far the first time I can remember. I think the most picture I could paint was it was a house that we were in, and I remember, like I said, it was like play. It was like playing. You know how you want to wrestle around with your kids, and I remember the groping. That's when the groping started. The kind of like dry humping started then, and to be honest, I think not saying nothing then is what allowed it to continue, and that's kind of that started the journey in that second house. I was scared. I had that this is not happening, or why is this happening, or why me? It was just that like this is not happening. I was scared. I was very scared, and I think I more was scared of telling my mom than dealing with it. I was like, okay, well, this is something I'm finna have to just kind of take on rather than have to tell this to my mom when she's finally feeling hopeful, finally feeling like she has help, or finally feeling like, somebody's here to stay to help her. I would say we never stayed in the house probably more than 2 years. So we were constantly moving. And as we moved, things gradually just kind of got worse. It started with, like I said, it was playing around. So the groping, dry humping happened. And then we would move. And in that house, same thing. It was a lot of dry humping and groping happening, and then it got to a point where he would have me watch him like ejaculate, and it went from watching him ejaculate to him producing or doing on me and then ejaculating. And at the same time, during this time, he would say things like, I don't want to get you pregnant, or if your mom finds out, she would kill me, or he would apologize. So I was just very confused, and this just happened house to house, and it was like the same thing. It never led to full penetration. I remember one time when I was a teenager, when he tried penetration, but it was just like I was young. I think he just realized he didn't want to go that far, or it was going to be more painful on me to deal with something like that. When it started, like I said, I was around 7, 8 years old, and then it ended around 14. It affected my life a lot because I didn't feel pretty. I didn't feel like girl at times. It was like I was always wanted to cover up. I became very tomboyish, which of course means like I wasn't dated. I never have a boyfriend while I was in school. I was like one of the guys. I always wanted to, go with my big brother wherever he was going. I was very rough because it was like I wanted a sense of toughness. I found myself covering up, which ultimately just made almost like I felt like I was becoming a boy. That impacted me a lot at school because you get made fun of, you get talked about, people ask you, are you gay? Are you a boy? Do you want to be a boy? You get all these things, and I tried to turn my pain into laughter. So I became like the class clown, cracking jokes, picking on people, and I know I shouldn't. Like I tried to just project my feelings and emotions by doing other things. I remember like writing, I used to write songs, write poetry, try to just put, words into art in a sense. It finally ended when I left home. I think it was when I call her my bonus. She kind of started taking me in so that I could play sports. And since that was happening, I didn't have to go home. I didn't have to go home anymore, so I wasn't accessible. And so I think that just stopped it because I just stopped going home. I got free from it from my bonus mom taking me in. I could spend a night and stay there, and it kind of went away. That's when I kind of, with people that I trusted or that I was close to, I started talking about it a little bit because that's the moment I started cutting. When I was engulfing and experiencing the different emotions as a teenager, I think that's when I tried to I really want to tell my mom, but I don't know how, so how do I get her attention? And I went from being a good student probably to semi-troubled, good grades to mediocre grades, hanging around with different crowds. I think it was just me trying to figure out how do I get the right person's attention and what does that look like. When I was in high school, I was able to move in with my bonus mom, and that's when I started cutting to deal with my emotions. While I was in it, I had feelings and emotions, but I never dealt with it. It was like I would close my eyes, I would go to whatever place I needed to go to. During it, I would always act like I'm sleeping, put the pillow over my face, whatever I needed to do to get away. But it was like once it all was over, I felt like, oh, I'm free from it. Then all of the feelings and emotions, and you feel neglected, abandoned, you feel hurt, you feel so many things. And so it's like you hurt in another way to deal with a hurt that you can't really face yet. I actually started cutting when I had visited home at one time, and it was during nighttime. I think I was just frustrated, and I was in the bathroom crying, and I hurt myself. I cut myself for the first time, and it went from one slit to multiple, and I kind of just covered it up. And my stepdad actually saw it. He just never said nothing. I remember going to school, and I had track practice, and one of my teammates grabbed my arm. It became a big deal. They went to the counselor went to my coaches, and my coaches came and talked to me, and that's the first time I kind of opened up a little bit. My coach, I still keep in contact with her today. She came and just wanted to talk to me like, this is not you, what is going on? I started skipping classes and I was getting truancies. I just wasn't myself at this point. I wasn't fully telling my story. I just was telling them I had a lot going on and I wasn't happy. And they didn't force me to talk at the time. But I did start talking to my bonus mom a little bit. I did not want to go home anymore. So I would be with her during the week and then sometimes go home on the weekend. I eventually got to a point I didn't go home at all. That's where the cutting. So the cutting was like a couple of experiences, but then my coaches and my bonus mom were able to help me navigate through how to kind of express myself, or they were just so supportive. I didn't feel like that's what I needed to do. And by my 10th grade year, I started just not acting myself. So I stopped playing all the sports. I started working, and I didn't have scholarships to go to college, so I came into the Navy at 18 years old, and that was my escape. I was like, I don't have to go back home, and so I went to Japan for 6 years, and that's where God found me, and I started my faith journey. And through that faith journey is when I started kind of studying my own story and dealing with my emotions and forgiveness and my own trauma. And so I didn't tell my mother till I was 25 years old. I actually released my first book called What's the Word Worth in Japan, and it was like, okay, now that I feel like I'm kind of working through this healing, working through my trauma, want to use my story to help others, how do I package this? And that's when I started doing poetry first, and I wrote my first book. And then after I wrote my first book, I'm like, okay, now that I kind of got the jitters and the fear out, what's next? And I was like, well, I need to tell my mom. And that's when I told my mom, and it just, it broke her heart. So now I'm 34. I have 3 published books. I travel speaking to people about finding hope after trauma. I'm a part of a great organization called Incest Aware. I'm a 15-year naval engineer. So I get to travel a lot doing engineer stuff with the Navy. I've just went through CBT and just healed through my own journey. And now I teach people like there is hope after this. There's life after this. What happens to us does not have to fill up our complete identity. So now just very successful as a life coach, trauma coach, writer's coach, motivational speaker. I do my own podcasting. So really just using every platform I can to help people see themselves on the other side of trauma. I'm getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling. I look forward to getting my doctorate so that I can actually do trauma therapy myself once I retire from the Navy. That there is hope. If you continue to go through it and face the emotions and the triggers and the things that come up while you're studying your story, it's kind of like using that to fuel what it is that you want to become. Like, I know that I went through this. I know that this experience was not my fault. I know I couldn't have done anything to prevent this. This was not on me. But also owning, like, what can I do now to help someone else get on the other side of their trauma so they don't have to live a life of just depression and anxiety and feeling paranoid or wondering if the entire world is going to shame them or guilt them for what they experience. Your story is your story and nobody can change that. Your truth is your truth and nobody can change that. If you hear a lot from victors that somebody didn't believe them or somebody wanted to tell them not to tell their story. And I always tell people, if somebody want to change the story, they can tell their own part of it. But we are free to do as we choose to, and continue to fight. The fight is worth it. Continue to go through whatever it is you need to go through to get on the other side and become who you actually want to be in life. Looking back, I wish I could have told myself that your voice matters. I wish I could tell myself that it doesn't matter if someone believes you or not, or the response of people, you can still speak your truth anyway. If I could give advice to families, even spouses, is go beyond the surface. A lot of times, especially parents, we look at the behavior and we try to respond to just the behavior instead of going a little bit deeper, saying, but why the behavior? Or asking the questions and creating a safe space for dialogue between parents and children that's safe. I think a lot of times now there is not, especially in the Black culture, there is not a lot of healthy dynamics in the household when it comes to allowing children to have a voice at home. And so for me, it's create those safe spaces early so that no matter what a child goes through in their life, they always feel like, if I don't go tell nobody, I'm going home to tell my family. My first book is called What's the Word Worth? And it's me that was the book I wrote right before my story came out just full on. So What's the Word Worth is my first book. Then Just to Unwrap It is my second book, which talks about how God gave each of us a gift, even when that gift is wrapped in pain. So sometimes unwrapping that gift is about facing the pain that is within. So that second book is called Just Unwrap It. And then the third book that I just published last year is called Dear Brain, You Have My Attention. And that's going beyond the healed heart. We kind of work on healing our heart, but I bring in theology and psychology treatment and talk about how we heal mind, body, and soul. And sometimes we get the heart work right, but we don't always go back and see how our minds were impacted by our trauma. I think for me, this is probably as deep as I've ever went with my story, to be honest. It was really great experience, but I think for me, if I could speak to children and even parents, sometimes it's strangers. It's the strangers that we trust first because we either fear disappointing our parents or the response of our parents. And so creating a safe space is super important, and building on relationships of trust between parent-child, child-child, siblings. It is important. I feel like a lot of time in this world, we're taught to protect ourselves from strangers. But as we know in this community, a lot of our abusers are people that we know and love. And so I challenge people not just to worry about the people that they don't know, but also we have to realize that we have to protect ourselves sometimes from our siblings and family members and parents, step parents, grandparents, and make that known that harm is harm.